Okay, the reading for this week is Akutagawa Ryūnosuke's short story Momotarō. And Momotarō is, of course, a very famous folk legend that comes, I don't know exactly when it first appears on the scene, but it dates back to antiquity, I think. And Akutagawa, who is the great modern short story writer of the first part of the 20th century, especially the Taisho period. Remember the dates of these periods if you haven't done so already. Taisho begins 1912, ends in 1926, and Akutagawa is the sort of quintessential Taisho period writer, and he famously committed suicide the second year of the Showa period, I think in 1927. So we will be reading, we've already read several of his works, and we'll be reading this one this week. And by the way, this story, both the original Japanese and Kathryn Tanaka's brilliant translation, will be included in my forthcoming book called Bilingual Reader. What is it called? No. Modern Japanese Literature, a Bilingual Reader. And it will include this work and probably another work by Akutagawa as well. Alright, so this is Momotarō, and yes, it's based on the legend of Momotarō, and he rewrites it, and this is kind of a preferred style of Akutagawa Ryūnosuke. So rather than just writing about contemporary events of himself or the people around him in a realistic mode, he takes these old stories from, say, the Konjaku Monogatari Shu or other classical texts, and he rewrites them. And kankotsu dattai is a word that you see in Japanese aesthetics and literature quite often. It means basically recasting or adaptation. So taking something from the past, changing the bones is literally what kankotsu means, and reworking it for a contemporary audience, and in order to point out certain things about the story that would not be otherwise apparent, and about the contemporary world that would not be otherwise apparent. And we see this this sort of style in full force in this story. Okay, before I read this story, it's a very short story, so I should be able to recite the whole thing in less than 10 minutes or so. Before I do that, I'm going to read the study guide questions. There are 5, I think, in all, and then we'll jump into the story. Akutagawa, here's study question number 1. Akutagawa begins his story with references to both Chinese and Japanese mythology. So there are many references, literary allusions, mythological allusions in the story, and Professor Kathryn Tanaka kindly provided copious footnotes that I won't be reading in this video, but we will discuss the footnotes in class. And she explains a lot of these references to both Chinese and Japanese mythology. Why does Akutagawa do this? So why there's so many references? How does the addition of myth change a retelling of a folk tale? Okay, so by adding another myth to a folk tale, how does it change it? And how does it frame our reading? So this addition of myth frame our reading. Question number 2. The titular character in this story, Momotarō, of course, is often seen as representing idealized Japanese masculinity, and by extension, the Japanese state. So this is the standard reading of Momotarō as kind of a symbol for the modern Japanese imperial state. How does Akutagawa use this association in his piece, and to what ends? Okay, so how does he use the association that people already have in their heads of what Momotarō is, and how does he flip it around and sort of turn it on its head? And of course, it doesn't mention this in the study questions in the study guide, but imperialism is in the background. So Japanese imperialism, which begins sort of, you could probably date it back to the war with Russia in 1904, 1905, or even further back to the first Sino-Japanese War in 1895, I think, 96. But it really starts to gain momentum in 1910 with the annexation of Korea, and then you have Taiwan, and then the war begins. Serious expansion of the Japanese imperial empire. It begins, of course, after Akutagawa's death, but it was already in the air, and the ideas about imperialism and Japanese imperialism and expansion into Asia and so forth were in the air. And this work can, I think, be read as a critique of Japanese imperialist ideology. So we'll discuss that further in class as well. And perhaps he's saying that the seeds of Japanese imperialism are in this story, and he's using this story to critique imperialism. Question number 3. Folklorists have typically argued that there is a set symbolism for the animals that appear in this story, usually associated with the Chinese zodiac. In Japanese, we say the Junishi. And Junishi is a complex subject, the Chinese zodiac that was imported to Japan, Japanese zodiac. And I'll probably make another separate video about the Chinese and Japanese zodiac at a further date, at a later date, and we'll go over it in more detail. But just keep in mind that this work uses the animals, it features the animals that are central to the Chinese zodiac, and in that the monkey, the bird, and the dog are directly opposed to the kimon, or the demon's gate, as seen below, coupled with the fact that these animals represent specific samurai virtues as well. So each animal corresponds with a Confucian or samurai virtue, specifically the monkey as wise, the dog as loyal and dutiful, chuken, as the word implies in Japanese, a loyal dog, chuken, and the pheasants, the kiji, were brave. Do the animals represent these values in Akutagawa's story? Okay, so is he consistent with, is his use of these animals consistent with their standard associations? If not, how are these values subverted in Akutagawa's depiction of the animals and their behavior? Why do you think he does this? Okay, so I think he does subvert the traditional associations. Why does he do this? What is his intent? What is the point he's trying to get across? And question number 4, what significance do the oni have in the story? The oni are the demons, right? What are they meant to represent? And then we have a little depiction there in the study guide in the book that will be coming out next year of the Junishi Chinese zodiac. We'll go over that in class. All right, and again, this is by Professor Kathryn Tanaka, the translation, and she based her translation off of Akutagawa Ryūnosuke, the version of the story included in Volume 5 of the Akutagawa Zenshu, which was published in 2002. All right, and now here is the stories, but before I get to the story, let me do a quick introduction of Akutagawa, whom we're already familiar with, but born 1892, died 1927, suicide. Japan's greatest short story writer, arguably. Probably, actually. We can dangen on that one. Born in Tokyo, he published Hana, is his first short story. He published that, The Nose, in 1916 while studying at the Tokyo Imperial University, so Todai Tokyo Daigaku, Teidai as it was called in those days. And the start of his literary career was highly guarded by Natsume Soseki. So Soseki was the first to notice his talent, and he kind of plucked him out and put him at the center of the Bundan literary establishment of the day. After graduation, he taught English as a part-time instructor at the Naval Engineering College, and he published famous works such as Imogayu, Yam Gruel, it's translated as. In 1916, he published that. Hokyō no Shi, The Death of a Christian, and Rashomon, and Yaba no Naka too, of course. Yaba no Naka we might be included in this anthology, and that, of course, served as the basis for Kurosawa's famous film called Rashomon, which shares the same title of Akutagawa's other famous story from 1917 called Rashomon. After resigning from the Naval Engineering College in 1919, he went full-time into literary activity as a staff writer for the Osaka Mainichi Shimbun. In 1927, he committed suicide at the age of 36, swallowing a dose of veronal, I think is the name of the drug that he took to kill himself. And he had 2 kids, apparently. Yes, okay. All right, here is the story now. All right, it's very late in the day. I'm going to need some coffee to get through this. All right, part 1. It's in 6 short sections. First section. Long, long, so very long ago, deep within the heart of the mountains, there grew a single gigantic peach tree. So the momonoki, the peach tree. Perhaps it is not enough to describe it as simply gigantic. The branches of this tree stretched above the clouds, and the roots sank through the depths of the earth and twined into the underworld. The underworld is the Yoni no Sekai, right? There's a note about the underworld there. Yomi no Kuni. where the spirits pass into when a person dies. Alright, twinned into the underworld. During the time when heaven and earth were still one, the god Izanagi threw peaches as projectiles as he fled the fires of the 8 spirits. Okay, more note about this. This is a reference to the Kojiki, the sort of foundational myth of Japanese civilization, the Kojiki. The god Izanagi threw peaches as projectiles as he fled the fires of the 8 spirits in the land between this world and the next. More notes about that of the Yomotsu Hirasaka, a flat plain that marks the boundary between this world and the underworld, is the reference there. I'm not going to read any more of the footnotes. Sorry. The peaches in that age of the gods were the fruit of this tree. All right, let me start over. Kind of lost our momentum there. Long, long ago, so very long ago, deep within the heart of the mountains, there grew a single gigantic peach tree. Perhaps it is not enough to describe it simply as gigantic. The branches of this tree stretched above the clouds, and the roots sang through the depths of the earth and twinned into the underworld. During the time when heaven and earth were still one, the god Izanagi threw peaches as projectiles as he fled the fires of the 8 spirits in the land between this world and the next. The peaches in that age of the gods were the fruit of this tree. Since the time before this world was separated into day and night, this tree has bloomed once every 10,000 years. Thus, once every 10,000 years has the tree borne fruit. The flowers burst forth like crimson silk umbrellas with pistons of gold. The fruit, there is no need to state the fruit, was large. But what was more wonderful than that, in the place of a pit, every peach was pregnant with a beautiful boy. Long, long ago, so very long ago, these tree branches, shading the mountain valleys and laden with innumerable peaches, stood quietly bathing in the sunlight. The fruit, born once every 10,000 years, will not fall to the earth for another 1,000 years. Yet on one lonely morning it happened that the 3-footed crow of the sun softly lit upon a branch. With this act, with a single peck, down fell an as yet unripened peach, a puny fruit. The fruit tumbled down through the clouds, plummeting into the valley stream. The valley river, of course, pushed by in a white spray, was flowing toward the land where humans lived. After this fruit, pregnant with a baby, left the heart of the mountains, who picked it up? Shall I tell the tale afresh? An old woman, alone near the mountain stream. As the children all throughout Japan know, the old man had gone to cut firewood, and she was watching his clothes, or something along those lines. All right, let me read this one footnote here, footnote number 6. The original Momotarō tale is ubiquitous in Japan, as Akutagawa correctly states. So all my students know the story before I have to explain the plot to them. Everyone knows it learns it as a kid. Every child knows it. To give a brief outline of the modern version of the table, which first appeared in elementary school textbooks in the 1880s, and here's the short summary of it. A childless elderly couple find a peach in a river while the old woman washes up and the old man gathers firewood. They open the peach and a baby pops out, who they name Momotarō, literally peach boy. Momotarō grows up and goes on a quest to rid the land of Oni, or ogres, or demons, I said earlier. Ogres is another way to translate Oni, that live on a nearby island and who are terrorizing the area. He is joined by a monkey, a pheasant, and a dog, in exchange for a kibidango, or millet dumpling. Together, Momotarō and his companions defeat the Oni and return victorious to his home. Akutagawa's version, then, should be read as a political satire aimed at criticizing Japanese militarism across East and Southeast Asia. Okay, so this relates to the question that we had in the study guide about how this work is a critique of Japanese imperialism. All right, so keep this summary of the main story that all the kids at the time would have learned since the 1880s, and note the differences and the similarities between Akutagawa's version of the story and that summary that I just read to you. All right, moving on now to part 2. Momotarō, born from a peach, made up his mind to go conquer Oni Island. The reason why he decided to do this was because he hated going to work in the mountains, the river, or the fields like the old man and the old woman who found him and raised him. When they heard this, the old couple in their hearts were disgusted with this naughty boy and were eager to get him out of their home without further delay. They made him a flag to take and prepared a sword for him. So he's a young imperial soldier going to smite the foreign barbarians, right? They made him a flag to take and prepared a sword for him, paired with a cover for his armor and all the other things he might need as he readied for his departure to the battlefront. In addition to this, they also made him rations, the kibidango that he had demanded. Thus, Momotarō set out with pride to conquer Oni Island. Before long, he met a huge stray dog who had hunger in his eyes as he addressed Momotarō. Okay, so this work can be read as an allegory. Keep that in mind, a guwa, tatoe banashi, right? In an allegory, all of the major entities, characters, events of the story correspond to something, right? So in class we can consider who do the Oni correspond to in the context of Japan of the Taisho period, right? Is it referring to the Chinese or the Koreans or something specifically? We'll discuss that in class, along with all the other allegorically correspondential things that appear in this story. And the millet dumplings often, here's a note about the dango, the kibidango. The millet dumplings often said in the tale to be the best in Japan, as Momotaro's animal companions in the standard version agree to join him for one dango. They are an integral part of the story. Okay, so make note of the kibidango, which is important to the story. Before long, he met a huge stray dog. So this is his first companion that accompanies him on his adventure. He met a huge stray dog who had hunger in his eyes as he addressed Momotarō. Momotarō, Momotarō, what is that hanging from your waist? These are the best kibidango in all of Japan, Momotarō answered proudly. Of course, in actuality, Momotarō doubted these were truly the best in all of Japan, but the dog, hearing the words kibidango, instantly sidled up next to Momotarō. Please give me one. Shall I go with you? Momotarō quickly took out his abacus. I won't give you one, I'll give you half of one. For some time the dog remained obstinate, repeating, Please give me one. But Momotarō refused to budge and reiterated, I'll give you half. In the end, as it always is with trade, the resolution of those without the goods weakens and gives way. With a sigh, the dog finally agreed to go with Momotarō in exchange for half of a kibidango. Later, in addition to the dog, and also for the price of half a kibidango, a monkey and a pheasant, so the saru and the kiji, joined them. But while it was to be lamented, these animal companions did not get along very well. The dog, with his strong fangs, mocked the cowardly monkey. The monkey, quick to react to this, in turn mocked the pheasant. The pheasant, who had studied seismology, so jishingaku in the original Japanese, and such like, retaliated against the dull-headed dog. These quarrels went on, and even after Momotarō had made them his retainers, he took no trouble to unite them. Okay, so he allows them to fight and quarrel with one another. And there's a brief note about the animals in Momotarō are drawn from the Chinese zodiac, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Jūnishi. They're drawn from the Jūnishi to make up a force strong against the Oni, but they also represent societal values and Japanese folk beliefs. Okay, so Confucian values, virtues, and folk beliefs as well. The monkey is associated with an understanding of right and wrong, so of yi, in the Confucian Chinese term, right, that we've already discussed. Giri, the gi of giri, yi in Chinese. So righteousness, the monkey is associated with good and evil, and the distinction between good and evil. The dog represents duty and loyalty. So zhong in Chinese, loyalty, chugi, the chu of chugi. Where the pheasant was considered brave because of the self-sacrificing nature of the mother pheasant who carries her babies on her back. Akutagawa here references seismology, so the Jishingaku, because Japanese folk belief held that pheasants, the kiji, could predict earthquakes as they react vocally to the slightest earthquake, tremor, or even thunder. Okay, so kiji are said to notice the earthquake long before humans do. The coming imminent earthquake long before humans do. Alright, so the pheasant who had studied seismology and such retaliated, and Momotarō had made them retainers, but he took no trouble to unite them. Continuing. On top of this, after the monkey had eaten his ration and was satiated, he quickly began to raise repeated objections to the bargain he had struck. He started saying it was debatable whether or not they should accompany Momotarō to Oni Island for merely half a kibidango. Okay, so the monkey is the cleverest of them all, and he's starting to doubt whether they should trust this Momotarō and accompany him for just a half of a kibidango. Then the dog, roaring with a rebuff, turned on the monkey to rend him to pieces. If the pheasant had not intervened, the monkey might have died then without the crabs getting their revenge. And this is a reference to the Kanigassen, which is explained, another legend is explained in the footnote there. However, the pheasant quieted the dog, at the same time explaining to the monkey the morality of the leader-subordinate relationship and telling him to follow Momotaro's orders. Okay, so the pheasant quiets them and reconciles them and tells them to follow the orders of Momotarō. This was after the monkey had fled to the top of the roadside tree to escape the dog's assault, so it was easy for the monkey to ignore what the pheasant had to say. In the end, it was Momotaro's cleverness that appeased the monkey. Looking up at the monkey in the tree and waving his rising sun, so the Japanese imperial flag, to and fro, Momotarō released the monkey from his obligations as a retainer in a deliberately frigid tone. All right then, don't join us. But for that, after we've conquered Oni Island, we won't share one bit of treasure with you. The monkey, with his deep greed, opened his eyes wide. Okay, so greed is an attribute of the monkey here. I don't think that's a normal association, a standard association, or quality that he usually possesses. So Akutagawa is adding some elements into this story. The monkey with his deep greed opened his eyes wide. Treasure? Really? Is there treasure on Oni Island? It's not even a question of is there. There's a treasure called the Uchide no Kozuchi, a mallet that shakes out anything you wish. Okay, there's a note about the Uchide no Kozuchi, and this is a magical mallet that is often said to belong to Oni. It is similar to Aladdin's lamp in that the owner can wish for anything they desire. A mallet that shakes out anything you wish. So from that mallet, if you shake out more Uchide no Kozuchi, then that means in a single instant you can have anything you want, right? That's heartening talk. Please take me with you. Momotarō had made the monkey a retainer again, and they hurried along the road to conquer Oni Island. Okay, moving on, part 3 now. Oni Island was a lonely desert island. Yet it was not merely rocky crags, as is commonly believed. In reality, the island was spotted with soaring palm trees, and birds of paradise sang from their branches. It was a beautiful utopian paradise. The Oni living in this utopia were naturally peace-loving. Okay, so they have this image of what the Oni land looks like and what the Oni creatures are like. But then when they arrive, they find that they're very different from their stereotypes, which is, again, relates to this larger critique of Japanese imperialism and imperialist ideology. They were peace-loving. Yes, it seems that Oni were a race that was naturally more given to pleasure than we humans. The Oni that appear in the story of the boil removal danced all night long. There's a note about that famous story from the Ujishu Monogatari, which tells the story of an old man who came upon a group of Oni dancing. He joined in and delighted them with his dance so much that they magically removed a boil from his cheek. The old man's neighbor, also plagued by a boil, heard the tale and went to the dance with the Oni as well. He turned out to be such a wretched dancer that the Oni grew angry, and rather than remove the neighbor's boils, they added some to his face. Is a comical story from the Ujishu Monogatari of the 13th century, and that's referred to here in this story. So the Oni that appear in the story of the boil removal danced all night long. The Oni that appear in the story of Isumboshi do not suggest danger. Rather, it seems as if they were admiring the princess. And there's another note to the Isumboshi about this. And the notes obviously are required for the foreign readers. When Japanese readers read this story, they do not need all these copious notes because they're already familiar with all these stories. Alright, but we'll go over them in class nonetheless. And of course, it is natural to assume that Shuten Doji of Oe Mountain and Ibaragi Doji of Rashomon were evil men. Again, 2 notes about these particularities of culture. But if Ibaragi Doji loved Suzako Oji the way we love the Ginza, and this is of course the Ginza in Tokyo, then why shouldn't he sometimes quietly appear in Rashomon? To be sure, gotta pause it here for a second. I noticed a typo in the document. To be sure, Shuten Doji stayed in a cave on Oe Mountain drinking sake. The story that he kidnapped women, while not presuming to question its truth, there is nothing more than what the women said themselves. Should we assume that what they say is indeed the truth? I have doubted this for the past 10 years. Were not Naiko and Emperor Shi both in some degree worshippers of maniacal women? And that's a reference to classical China. Emperor Shi ordered Miyamoto no Yoritomo to attack Shitendoji of Oe Mountain to free the women who had been captured. Alright, lots of references we'll have to go over in class. And allusions. The Oni, in the tropical landscape, playing the koto and dancing, reciting the lyrics of ancient poets, lived a peaceful life. Moreover, the Oni wives and daughters wove on their looms, brewed sake, and used orchids in flower arrangements. They lived like our wives and daughters. There was not even the smallest difference. Oni mothers in particular, with hair already white and fangs missing, would watch over their grandchildren and tell them stories of the terror of us human beings. Okay, so the Oni, the species of creatures, whatever they are, whom humans regard as awful monsters, right? Similarly regard the humans as Oni. Tell them stories. If you continue your naughty behavior, then we'll send you to Human Island. Oni sent Human Island, like Shitendoji, are sure to be killed. Oni sent to Human Island, like Shitendoji, are sure to be killed. You ask, what are humans? Humans are beings with no horns, with pale faces, arms and legs. I cannot explain how grotesque they are. Moreover, the day I happened upon a human woman, she had lead powder rubbed on her face and limbs. As bad as that is, if that were all of it, that might not be so terrible. But both the men and women tell lies and are deeply greedy. They burn with jealousy and are incredibly vain. Oh, they kill their friends, light fires, steal things, and run around naked without any hair. Okay, so to the Oni, the humans are the true barbarians, and the okay, continuing part 4. Momotarō brought upon these sinless Oni the worst terror they had experienced since the founding of their nation. The Oni had forgotten their metal rods, and they cried, "A human has come!" as they ran about in confused panic, darting amongst the straight, towering palms. Momotarō held his peach flag aloft in one hand and raised his rising sun with the other, as he barked orders at his animal retainers. The dog, the monkey, and the pheasant likely ought not to be considered to be retainers on good terms with their master, but more importantly, as starved animals, they probably did not qualify as especially loyal and brave soldiers. Indeed, like a hurricane, they sped in pursuit of the fleeing Oni. In a single bite, the dog killed a young Oni. The pheasant, with his sharp beak pecked an Oni child to death. Okay, so they're committing atrocities in this land of the Onis. The monkey as well, to be brief, because the monkey and humans are closely related kin. Before the monkey strangled the Oni daughters to death, he invariably ravaged them. Okay, so they're committing the kinds of atrocities that the Japanese Imperial Army would commit all throughout Asia a decade or so later, 2 decades later. After they committed every imaginable crime, at long last the Oni chief with a number of surviving Oni surrendered to Momotarō. Okay, so the hero in the regular standard legend that all Japanese had learned in schools since the 1880s is turned into a barbarian, right? Into a horrible war criminal. Momotarō should have been proud. Oni Island was no longer the land it had been yesterday, with birds of paradise singing. The corpses of Oni littered the land leading up to the palm forest. The Oni chief solemnly kowtowed down low before Momotarō, who of course held his peach flag in one hand and was accompanied by his 3 retainers. Momotarō immediately passed sentence on the Oni chief. Well then, out of my extraordinary kindness, I'll spare your lives. For that, give us the treasure of Oni Island, and don't miss a thing. Yes, we offer it all up to you. And in addition to that, you'll give us your children as hostages. Yes, we understand. After the Oni chief had pushed his head into the earth a final time, with great trepidation, he fearfully asked Momotarō a question. We are aware that it was because we were in some way disrespectful to your highness that you conquered us. In truth, however, we Oni of Oni Island do not understand what we did to first offend you. We beg you to explain how we affronted you. Okay, so it's the colonized group is asking the colonizers, why have you done this to us? What did we do to you to deserve this? And Momotarō gave a staid nod. I'm the best in Japan. I'm Momotarō. And because I employed my 3 loyal retainers, the dog, the pheasant, and the monkey, I came to conquer Oni Island. So he gives an illogical answer to the Oni chief's valid question. Well, but for what reason did you employ these gentlemen? From the first, I wanted to conquer Oni Island, and with that intention I employed them for a kibidango. How's that? If you don't understand after this explanation, I'll kill you all. Okay, so he gives another illogical response. Basically, because you were there, I decided to conquer you. The Oni chief, looking surprised, quickly retreated several feet and at last politely bowed again. Section 5. The best in Japan, Momotarō, with his 3 retainers, the dog, the monkey, and the pheasant, triumphantly set out for home, pulling a cart laden with the Oni children they had taken hostage as well as the treasure. Alright, there wasn't a question in the study guide about the narrator of this work, the third-person narrator, but we can discuss the narrator and the narrator's perspective later in class, and his sort of ironic attitude toward Momotarō and the exploits of Momotarō on this expedition. Taken hostage as well as the treasure. This is the only part of the story that children all over Japan already know. However, Momotarō didn't necessarily live happily ever after. When the Oni children grew up, they bit their keeper, the pheasant, to death, after which they quickly absconded back to Oni Island. In addition to this, the Oni who had survived Momotaro's assault sometimes came from across the sea and set fire to Momotaro's mansion and tried to catch him off guard. Okay, so they were conquered, they were defeated, but they still put up revolts, subsequent revolts against the colonizers. There is a rumor that the monkey was murdered in a case of mistaken identity. With the succession of misfortunes like this, Momotarō could not help sighing. Oni are certainly deeply obsessive creatures. It's inexcusable that they forget the debt they owe you, master, for sparing their lives. The dog always groaned mournfully, looking at Momotaro's frown. At the same time, on the stony shore of the desolate Oni Island, 5 or 6 young Oni, bathed in the tropical moonlight and with the purpose of gaining independence for Oni Island, readied bombs made of coconuts. So these are the freedom fighters mounting a revolt against their overlords. Perhaps it was because they had forgotten the love of the gentle Oni daughters, but as they worked in silence, their eyes, bigger than teacups, shone with happiness in their work. And the final section, part 6, is just one paragraph. Deep in the mountains, beyond the realm of human knowledge, covered in clouds and mist, the peach tree stands today as it did so long ago, with countless peaches hanging on it. Of course, only the peach pregnant with Momotarō had been prematurely swept away in the mountain stream. There is no knowing how many future prodigies sleep in those fruits. There is no knowing when the 3-footed crow of the sun will again come to rest on a branch of this tree. So again, the narrator here is being ironic. How many future prodigy lay sleeping in those fruits. Okay, that's the end of the story. This is a short story, but it's very dense, and there's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot of references to clarify, and so forth. And we'll do all of that in class. I will see you then. Goodbye.